So, Harry and Ross were passing through a dense forest. Suddenly, yeah, these are the let's say, of course they are adverbs, because whatever happens here and the verb that is happening here is being qualified here. It happened suddenly, but at the same time it adds to the emotions as well. You have to perform that storytelling. So suddenly the stillness of the forest was broken by a painful bellow of a buck. By the painful bellow of a buck. Buck, is a kind of deer. So the painful bellow of a buck. Bellow being a hard word. Yeah, it's a new word. It could be a new word for the ninth class or a 10th class student. But don't tell the meaning. It's a strict advice not to look for its meaning in the beginning. You don't have to be obstructed by the rocks, that is the hard words or the new words in the sentence. Just let the child infer the meaning out of it from the context. So the forest, it was still, and suddenly the stillness of the forest. Look at the sentence here. Suddenly the stillness of the forest. So just in the passing line, in the line, it was not actually told. We did not use a separate line or separate sentence to say that the forest was still. It is called a reduction in the sentence. So suddenly the stillness of the forest. So we are assuming that the forest was still, as it often is uh, in times of no howling by the jackals, no roaring by the lions. So the forest is assumed to be still. So suddenly the stillness of the forest was broken by the painful bellow of a buck. So, buck, that is a deer. So he must be yelling out in pain, isn't it? So could you guess what the buck might be doing? Yes, the child is intelligent enough to understand. He will infer the meaning out of this, and this is implied here through the line, the painful bellow of a buck. So the stillness is broken. Stillness of the forest is broken by a painful bellow of a buck. It was in pain. Now see, didn't you see the second line being a long one, the second sentence rather being a long one, and the immediate following sentence is such a short sentence. So this is to arrest the attention. This invites the attention of the reader as well as the listener. Next sentence comes as we approached the sound and were shocked to see a buck lying writhing in pain. Now you see, this sentence is an interesting one. It starts with a verb on the part of us. We did something. Now we were traveling through the forest. We were passing through the forest. It was a dense forest, and we approached the sound. So we did something. We approached the sound that we could hear, and the sound of our buck rather, who was yelling out in pain. We approached the sound, not the buck. We didn't know where the buck was. Only the sound was the indicator. The sound could take us to the buck also. So we followed the sound. We what is this word used? We approached the sound and were shocked. Were shocked. Now, I would not want to go into so many parts of grammar here, although it is a passive one. So we won't complicate the matters here. The child would be confused and even scared to go on reading it. So don't. I would advise the teachers not to take too many forms of grammar, too many parts of grammar together. So passive, okay, is understood. We were shocked to see a buck lying writhing in pain. Now see, this sentence uh, contains a last clause. To see a buck lying writhing in pain. The buck was lying. That's a verb done by the buck, that is a deer. It was lying. But was it just lying? Was it just lying, or was it doing something as well while lying. Yes, think over. The buck was lying. You could have written the buck was lying and it was writhing in pain. See, you could have come up with short sentences also, but the writer here, the story writer here, does not choose any short sentence here. He says, "We were shocked to see a buck lying writhing in pain." So you see, if I were to show the whole sentence to you, can you see there are three actually verbs, or in fact there are so many verbs, more than three actually. See the first part of the sentence, we approached the sound. We could as well end the sentence over here and it would have made sense, but we are not ending it, we are joining it with another clause using and. So you could teach the child to add conjunctions, to use infinitives, but not all together. Let the flow come, let the thread of feelings, the thread of thoughts come, and then if you think the child can grasp it, only then. Otherwise, you just read the sentence and get the emotions into the lines and the sentences, and the child would get it. So, we approached the sound and were shocked. The second clause could well as be we were shocked. So, and if we were to remove this and, it could have been we were shocked. Right. Now, we were shocked, but what were we shocked to see? Why were we shocked? So that explains the continuation of the sentence. We were shocked to see a buck. Now, just to see a buck, we were shocked. There are so many bucks and deers in the forest. Why would you be shocked to see a buck? Well, this buck was doing something which was not expected. It was a sudden thing that they saw, that we saw. What was the buck doing? That made us shocked. That got us into shock. Yes, it was lying down on the ground. And was it just lying to sleep, or was it lying and doing something else while lying, which we discussed a little while ago, if you remember? Yes, it was writhing and in pain. So it was in pain. Writhing in pain. Let the child imagine what writhing means. What do? You could ask the child to imagine of other situations where one writhes in pain. Like, what do you do when you suddenly get your fingers in the hinge of a door, or let's say a pin has pricked your hand? What do you do? Writhe in pain, or your ankle twists while you are running. What do you do? What do you have you seen someone writhing in pain when an ankle or the wrist, or yeah, while running the ankle gets twisted? Yeah, writhing in pain. Like, writhing in pain means much in trouble. Writhing means just twisting and turning in pain. So twisting it and get the answer out of the student. Don't tell him. And let the child think, and let him think in context. And if this context of the story, if the story's context is not helping, we as teachers can bring in other contexts, other real life contexts, which the child either has felt or gone through or has seen in other situations in life outside the classroom. So bring those experiences back to his or her mind inside the classroom, and that the child would feel happy that yes, I have arrived at the meaning. The teacher has not told me, I have arrived. Whatever you arrive at, you always remember, and what you are told, there is chances that you might forget. So it's a long sentence. It's horns. And why was it? Naturally, one emotion leads to another. One thought has a thread which leads to another thought, and an inquiry, a curiosity must arise in the mind of the child as to why the buck is writhing in pain. What happened to him? So let him picture. You could use even illustrations here. Its horns were entangled in steel wire, left behind by other campers. Let's stop over here. before and, because as soon as that and comes, the sentence becomes compound. So stop over there. Let's see. Let's dissect it open. Its horns were entangled. Its horns. Whose horns? The buck's horns. Right? They were entangled. They were entangled. Use the trick of emphasis. Its horns were entangled. Its horns were entangled. Were entangled in steel wire, left behind by other campers. My mind would simply question as to who left the steel wire. Where did the steel wire come from in a forest? There must have been other campers, other people camping over there in forest. Many people go. It's an adventure spot. So many people are careless enough to leave steel wires and steel things and dangerous things, and even of course litter around in the forest. Nobody cares. But steel wire is a dangerous thing for an innocent animal, and anybody can get caught in it, particularly when it comes to an innocent deer or a jackal or something, or some animal who is just passing by and suddenly gets curious about the wire. So, or even, just unwittingly, without knowing as to what is there on the way, the buck might have gotten its horns entangled in steel wire. What steel wire? Which steel wire? Which was left behind by other campers. Remember this. Now you can dissect open this part of the sentence. The steel wire left behind by other campers. So its horns, look at the third line here. So its horns were entangled in steel wire, which were left behind by other campers. Remember this, which were is not written over here. So this sentence can go this way, it is correct. So its horns were entangled in steel wire, left behind by other campers, and single movement it made, every single movement should be, and every single movement it made was causing the wires to tighten more around him. And that's a long sentence, but no problem, because it's a descriptive kind of a story. Every single movement it made was causing the wires to tighten more around him. We knew we had to react fast. Now the emotion comes back to us, because that was a trouble the deer or the buck was passing through or going through. Now what was on us? We had to react. So the next line, naturally the thread of this thought would pass on to this sentence. We knew we had to react fast. Why did we have to react fast? Otherwise, we would witness a poor animal strangled to death. Otherwise, we would witness. Now, that is in past tense and imaginary past tense. That was a possibility. We might witness a poor animal strangled to death, or we would witness a poor animal strangled to death. So Harry sprung into action. Remember, this is not about tenses, so we will not discuss much on the tenses. Of course, a little suggestion in the very beginning, and probably somewhere in the at times or intervals, we could remind children off and on. The children use the second form and the third form, since it is all happening in the past, or it rather has happened in the past. So Harry sprung into action. The spring, sprang, sprung. So Harry sprung into action. It could be actually, so Harry sprang into action. Yeah, that would be a far more correct word to be used. Now he took out the rope that was to be used to secure their tent. He took out the rope that was to be used to secure their tent. Now remember, Harry and Ross must have been there to camp in the forest. So they naturally would be carrying a rope as well along with. But now, looking at the urgency of the situation, now that they felt like rescuing the buck, the animal, the innocent buck who was in trouble really. So now they saw and they felt that it was urgent to rescue him. So Harry immediately took this step. He took the rope out that was to be used, that actually was meant to secure their tent, but now he forgets about the tent and everything, and he now uses that very rope to to rescue the buck. Then he took out a wire cutter which he had been carrying. Then he took out a wire cutter. Now, teachers, we could underline these verbs or different clauses or different parts of a sentence, but not to emphasize too much on that because it is storytelling. So it must have emotion. The emotion carried from one sentence to another. So there should be a flow which should not be broken. So remember, the teachers actually forget about the flow of emotions, the flow of thoughts, the progression of thoughts from one action to another, and they become too obsessed with grammar or structure of the sentence, which is not an important entity here. Although it is an important entity, but not to be. You can take one thing at a time. Don't mess it up. So then he took out a wire cutter and slowly began to cut the thin wire. Slowly began. Now again, two actions here. Action number one, Harry took out a wire cutter. Action number two, he slowly began to cut the thin wire. And both of these sentences are joined using a conjunction called and. Isn't it? So began to cut the thin wire after almost 45 minutes of hard work. And that's the duration of the time that he spent. So after almost 45 minutes of hard work, we managed to free the buck from the tangle of the wire. Now we could strike a relation between tangle and entangle. You know, there was a word actually we used in the third line here, the last word. Its horns were entangled. So we don't need to tell the meaning in Hindi or even in simplified English. Let the child infer out of the context. Its horns were entangled. You could picture them in other words like, I am entangled in my work, or while my sister was passing through the rose bush, her shawl got entangled in the thorns. Just picture in varying contexts, real life contexts, and the child would immediately understand it. So tangle of the wire. So free from the tangle means free from the grasp of the wire. So the horns were freed. As soon as we moved away, the buck was on its legs. As soon as we moved away, this is a beautiful use of the conjunction as soon as. So as soon as we moved away, use conjunctions, use discourse markers like then, use adverbs to connect the sentences, to connect the idea, one idea to another. So as soon as we moved away, the buck was on its legs. On its legs means he stood up. Right. After running about 50 meter, he ran as well. Who ran? The buck. So after running about 50 meter, it turned back and looked at us. Who turned back? It's the buck, and looked at us as if to say a thank you. As if to say a thank you. So it ran. You could have even told the child to write in this long sentence into 3 to 4 short sentences, but then that would not have been so effective as it is now. The use of after adds to the effect. See, after running about 50 meter, it's a continuity. Like after running about 50 meter, it turned back. See, there are two ways of actually writing the sentence. It ran about 50 meter, full stop. It turned back, full stop. It looked back at us to say thank you. 3 sentences here. But now, how about joining them using conjunctions and commas, punctuations? See, after is a conjunction here. After running about 50 meter, now what's the use of this after? What effect does it create? It's important to understand here. After running about 50 meter, now when we say this and pause a bit using a comma, then the listener or the reader, the student, gets curious because we have not yet finished the sentence. So we say after running about 50 meter, and then we give a pause and look into the eyes of the children, and the children pause and they inquiringly look into our eyes. Yes sir, yes ma'am, what next, what next? And then you can add, it turned back and looked at us. Who looked at us? The deer or the buck looked at us as if to say a thank you, and then vanished into the dense forest. Who vanished into the dense forest? Did we vanish or the deer or the buck vanish? Yes, because it is about the deer. It started with deer or the buck rather. It ran for 50 meters. It turned back. That is the buck looked at us. It wanted to say a thank you, and then it vanished. That is the buck vanished into the dense forest. These are the 5 different short sentences joined in using after, using a comma, using and using then, and then vanished into the dense forest. So that's how the story goes. You see, there's everything in the story. It has got emotion, it has got curiosity, the inquiry, it has got little suspense, it has got the prediction as well. The child can predict what happened next, and it has got a very wonderful ending as well. It has got a climactic ending. Yes, the child can predict that deer would be thankful, and deer would be thankful to Harry and Ross, who both have done this wonderful job of rescuing the buck. And lastly, it has got a moral message as well. And the message is, help someone in distress. Anyone in trouble you find on the way, then you should help him or her, even if it means forgetting your own destinations, forgetting your own predetermined path. Like you have gone for camping and you find this buck in trouble on the way. So you know how these two children, Harry and Ross, forget all about their camping, their intentions of enjoying in the forest, having an adventure over there, because they see someone who is more in need of a rope, who is more in need of their help than anybody else. Right, so it got a moral message as well. And see how this beautiful story ends in with the action of the deer. He vanished into the dense forest. That's how it goes.